me retiro del tenis profesional.
And with that one sentence, Rafael Nadal puts an end to his tennis career. 23 years, 92 titles, of which 22 are Grand Slams. But those numbers only scratch the surface of what defined Nadal's journey. From teenage prodigy with a meteoric rise, to battling constant injuries and pulling off comebacks that defied all odds. Not to mention his legendary rivalries that changed the history of an entire sport. This isn't just a career for the history books, it's a legacy that has inspired millions and will continue to inspire for generations to come. Just like Federer and Djokovic, Nadal is the type of athlete who transcended the sport. Even those who don't even watch tennis have probably heard of Rafael Nadal. His on-court accomplishments earn him a level of respect among players that is rarely seen.
So who do you think is the toughest player you've ever faced in your career?
Nadal.
Rafael Nadal.
Rafael Nadal on clay.
But although his rise was meteoric, Nadal's career was far from easy. For those of you who started watching tennis recently, you might not be aware, but back in the early to mid-2000s, there was a teenager named Rafael Nadal who was one of the biggest hypes the tennis world has ever seen. A kid from Manacor, a little city on the island of Mallorca in Spain, with a willingness to fight for every point as if it was his last. Not to mention the crazy amount of topspin he was able to generate in both forehand and backhands. Seemingly out of nowhere, Nadal broke through into the top 100 players on the ATP ranking at just 16 years old. At 17, he beat the number one in the world at the time, Roger Federer. At 18, he won his first ATP tournament in Sopot, placing him as the fourth youngest ATP champion in history. And by 2005, in his debut French Open appearance, Rafa took home the title at only 19 years of age. But the thing is, that wasn't even supposed to be his debut. Rafa actually started playing Grand Slams 2 years prior, with his first appearance at Wimbledon at 17 years old, and Nadal was set to play in the 2004 French Open, but had an ankle fracture that forced him to withdraw from the tournament. Oh, and get this, he also qualified to play the 2003 edition at just 16 years old, but supposedly tripped during practice right before the tournament started, which also forced him to withdraw. Can you imagine that Rafa had the chance to have played 2 more French Opens before his first title in 2005? He would have been really young, sure, but in 2005 he won the title, dropping just 3 sets the entire tournament. And that was only 2 days after he turned 19. Not exactly a close call, is it? So could he have won in 2003 and 2004? It sure is interesting to imagine that if that had happened, he would have 16 French Opens and 24 Grand Slams, tying with Djokovic. But every time I think about that, I remember what a wise man once said.
If doesn't exist.
Injuries like in those early years, however, were not uncommon throughout his career. His physical playstyle led many people to believe that his career would be full of injuries and eventually he would retire very early. Actually, Rafa himself even admits he thought his career was going to be way shorter.
I always thought that I'm going to stop my tennis career around 30s.
Yeah.
Well, everyone said
Okay.
I'm going to have a shorter career.
But overcoming those injuries is what made Nadal's journey so special. Somehow, every time Rafa got a major injury, he managed to come back just as strong as before. I mean, look at the list of all his major injuries throughout his career. By the way, for his 2014 wrist injury, I was present at the very practice when that happened. Here's some never before seen footage of that day that I recorded on my phone. So yeah, I'm not exactly his lucky charm. Anyway, it's safe to say that Rafa's resilience is pretty much unmatched when it comes down to injuries. Because even after all that, he still managed to put out one of the most impressive numbers of all time for 23 years. A testament to his longevity is the fact that he is the only player in history to be number one in 3 different decades. To put it in perspective, for Djokovic to equal this record, he would have to play and be number one in the world at least until 2030, at which point he will be 43 years old. Don't get me wrong, I would never dare to count Djokovic out. But I think it's safe to say Nadal will be keeping this record for a long time. And talking about records that would never be broken, how can we not talk about clay court dominance? Nadal once won 50 consecutive sets on clay in a period of 21 matches between 2017 and 2018. But even more impressive than that is his 81 consecutive match winning streak on clay between 2005 and 2007. The longest winning streak on any single surface in the Open era, which is 16 more matches than the already absurd 65 match winning streak from Federer on grass. Nadal also has the most titles in a single event for Grand Slams with his 14 French Opens, for Masters 1000 with his 11 Monte Carlo titles, and 4 ATP 500s, with his 12 Barcelona titles. Of course, all clay court tournaments. Throughout his entire career, Nadal maintained an 87.5 win percentage on clay, the highest of all time. But that sounds low when we compare it to just how dominant he was at Roland Garros, where he won 112 matches and only ever lost 4, which gives him a 96.6 win percentage. These numbers are so absurd that it's almost hard to understand, but Andy Roddick made the perfect comparison during his podcast that really put things in perspective.
The leader in the clubhouse as far as men's singles Grand Slam titles when I started my career was the great Pete Sampras, who got to 14. Rafa matched that in a single event.
That means that if Nadal never won another slam apart from the French Open, he would still have the third most Grand Slams in history, tied with Sampras. And just imagine for a second that if all Grand Slams were played on clay, it's possible that Nadal would have 56 Grand Slams.
If doesn't exist.
Okay, I get it, Rafa. Of course, that would have never happened considering the competition Nadal had to face during his career. And when I say competition, I mean specifically Federer and Djokovic, his two biggest rivals. He played a total of 110 matches against them, of which he won 53 and lost 47. It might not sound like a lot, but considering that in the 23 years of his career, Nadal lost just 227 times. These 47 losses against Federer and Djokovic represent more than 1/5 of every loss in his career. But that probably doesn't come as a surprise to many of you. These three played legendary matches. And if you want to see a little more about the crazy numbers the big three have put out over the years and how their era has unfortunately come to an end, I'll attach a video that you can watch after this one. There's no doubt Nadal has impacted tennis and influenced players. I mean, does this remind you of anyone?
The apprentice finally beats the master.
His influence is clear, not just in the stats, but in the new generation of players who grew up watching him. From his competitive spirit to his humble demeanor, Nadal's approach to tennis and life is something many admire about him. Rafa's ability to inspire goes way beyond his playing style. It's his resilience to fight, and his never give up attitude that made him so much more than just a tennis champion. Players like Federer and Djokovic might have pushed him on the court, but Nadal's real challenge always seemed to come from within, the constant battle with his own body, which he won time and time again. As we look to the future of tennis, there's no doubt Nadal's name will be mentioned alongside the greatest athlete of all time. Because while the man may have retired, the legend of Rafael Nadal will live on through every clay court win, every ferocious rally, and every young player chasing their dreams. Thank you, Rafa, for everything. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you in the next one.